Well, here we are, and it's Friday afternoon. It should be Friday morning, but it's Friday afternoon. But the reason for that is that Pat McGart was busy bringing chicken soup to deserving poor in the area of Donegal and Derry. And he has now finished his good works and has come back to us. Are you feeling refreshed after your labours, Pat?
Absolutely. The chicken soup. Wasn't there a book, a famous book, Chicken Soup for the Soul or something?
It is, yeah.
The guy came up with it, sold millions, made himself millions. Great idea.
Much better than the actual bringing of the soup. Were the recipients appropriately grateful to you and doffing their cap?
Absolutely. The poor will always be with us.
Yes, indeed. Thank God for that. Okay. Let's have a look at some of the stories that have been making the news. Now, one that has been all over the place, I kept hearing it on Radio Ulster actually, was the whole question of South Armagh policing, maybe policing in general, but particularly in South Armagh. I gather that, and you confirmed it to me, that there was a report submitted to the PSNI, whether they commissioned it or somebody else commissioned it, but it was about how could the PSNI function more effectively or be better, or recommendations for change. And among the things that were mentioned were three things caught my eye now, maybe other things caught yours. One was the idea of closing down the present PSNI station in Crossmaglen for all sorts of reasons. The second was joint Garda and PSNI patrols, and the notion of hot pursuit, which I always think sounds very exciting. Hot pursuit across the border after criminals should be permitted. And the third was the moving of monuments, or not moving of monuments, or plaques to the dead people on the RUC personnel who had died in the course of the Troubles. So all of those have been generating some degree of heat, if not light. What are your own thoughts on it, Pat, and the reactions you have heard from politicians?
Jude, what is there? 50 recommendations. And by the way, the thing was, and the key word is recommendations. They weren't, they're proposals and so on. And you talk about a knee-jerk reaction from Unionists. It was unbelievable. Like basically, Jude, if you live in, I think it's France and Belgium, they have some sort of concord in regard to hot pursuit. And it's all over Europe. You can go from one country to another in hot pursuit. There's all sorts of protocols and put in place and so on. And yet here on this island, the Unionists nearly go bananas. No, in other words, if somebody has robbed a store in at Culmore in Derry, or no, they'll do it the other way around, in Muff in County Donegal or Bridgend, just 2 or 3 miles from where I'm sitting now, and a Gardaí car comes right behind it, and the guys drive off. And the minute they reach the border, which is 2 miles away, they're gone. Whereas if there was the whole concept of pursuit, until the PSNI pick up the thing, the Gardaí could follow them and keep the PSNI, I presume, informed or whatever. Jude, that is normal policing. But hey, the knee-jerk reaction right away is this is all Ireland policing. And by the way, Jim Allister calling Byrne to resign, said it was a new low, said he was promoting all Ireland policing. Sammy Wilson says he has lost all credibility. And I could keep going on and on. Gordon Lyons, the economy minister, calling to resign. By the way, calling for a chief constable to resign because of recommendations made by people, and no one said they're going to be implemented. They are recommendations. That's the level we are at.
Well, have you any? I'm sorry about this awful noise. I'm going to have to get somebody to sort it. It sounds like I've got a bullock here clearing his throat every time I speak. But anyway, would you not have any sympathy with or understanding even of unionism's reaction? I mean, if I was a unionist, I could see how what you say makes sense. And it occurs all over the world, as you say, or lots of places throughout the world, where you have the police service in one area will cross the border and they'll be liaising very closely, if they're in pursuit of a criminal, with the police on the other side. But the border here is a special case. And as a unionist, I could say, well, I can see what way this thing is going. The idea is not really to pursue these criminals. It's another way of, well, maybe it is sincerely pursuing these criminals, but it's another way of blurring the borderline. Where exactly is the line between Northern Ireland and the south of Ireland? So it's part of an overall strategy to get people thinking all Ireland. Would you not sympathise with that view at all?
But Jude, this is really about operational things. It's not about the patrolling, the Shankill Road together. Like there's things like rural crime, drugs. So what else you can think on? Financial crime. What am I trying to think on here? Maybe human trafficking. I remember watching a program based on people being brought into Dublin through the North End into Britain. All those sort of things. The Gardaí and the Psni could work on those together without any sort of big problem for any of them. They're not talking about the Garda from going up Strand Road in Derry or any of that sort of stuff. It's just a recommendation. And no, Jude, I don't really have a lot of sympathy for it, because let's be honest here. The reaction here is it's not to do with policing. These are eminently sensible things that are being suggested and would be accepted in America and France and Germany and anywhere else. But it's because in Northern Ireland, a sensible cop chief has made these. And you see what I think Simon Byrne's big problem is, he thinks he's still somewhere in England, and that what's sensible and reasonable and there, but and he's been accused of not being sensitive to the concerns of unionism. Jude, he's a copper. He's not supposed to be a politician. Jude, one of the things they're talking about too, that he resigned and that he had insulted the memory of the 30 policemen in the station in Crossmaglen or something who had died during the Troubles, and so on, that they were going to move the memorial plaque. He said there was never an intention to move the memorial plaque. But what they are saying is that the plan is to close down the police station in Crossmaglen within 5 years. Now, Jude, I only passed it once many, many years ago, and it's the nearest thing to a police station in downtown Kabul. It's unbelievable. And by the way, I think the catalyst for all this, in 2019, Simon Byrne, shortly after he became chief constable, on a Christmas day, was photographed outside Crossmaglen police station with two, as far as I remember, heavily armed. They had these big guns, like it were, and it was making Crossmaglen seem like it was bandit country. And there was a serious, people in Crossmaglen now want to get on with their lives. They want to be able to go do their shopping. They want to,
can I ask you a question, Pat?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but could I ask you a question? If the station was rejigged, if it was take away all that armament, or it looks like something from 30 or 40 years ago, as you suggest, supposing it was made into a modern police station, are these plaques to the RUC men who might have died who were working there, will those be in place at the entrance in the lobby of is that the idea behind it?
Well, Byrne said there's going to be no change. He says the only time that the plaques were going to be removed is if I presume a station is closing. And he said that even then it would be handled sensitively. So he said this, basically, he didn't actually say this, so I'm putting words in his mouth, but basically I think what he was suggesting was this whole, it's an absolute outcry about nothing. The basic line is that it was a recommendation, should the police station close, that what happens to these plaques. If it's an operational station, nothing changes. So in other words, but I think Byrne has credibility or standing within the unionist community is very low because of the Bobby Story thing, and I think that's where it's all coming from.
I'm not sure about this thing. I understood the thing about the plaques to dead RUC men or women, that was something in terms of not just Crossmaglen, but police stations throughout the north.
Yeah, police station.
And that the unionists were up in arms about that. To be honest with you, I'd be a little bit unhappy with that kind of line. I think that's something that should be looked at carefully, not just tossed away and say, no, we're not going to deny our tribute to our gallant men and women who died in the course of combating terrorism. The reason I would be opposed to that would be it feeds into this same old story or narrative, as we now say, of good police, bad Republicans. So, I mean, if I was to say, for example, okay, let's keep these tributes to dead RUC men and women right in the lobby of whatever police stations they're in now. If you were to say, well, there's a lot of people going in there wouldn't have had much time for the RUC, who would have been violently opposed to them, in fact. Supposing you had alongside that, or I suggested that there be a plaque to say the hunger strikers, either in maybe, let's say, in the lobby of every public library in the north, or even in a police station. I mean, there would be an outcry. But the fact of the matter is, you see, there are people who revere, and they're entitled to do that, the sacrifice these RUC men and women made. There are people who are opposed to the RUC, who think the RUC inflicted damage and even death on Republicans, and they do honor those Republicans. They want their memory to be not be erased. You could argue, given the fact that we've got the same population size, roughly, that they should be just as prominent. But that won't happen. That will not happen.
That will certainly not happen.
It seems to be very unbalanced, really. I think there's a big case for saying, look, if the people want to hang on to their plaques, fine, but they should be prepared to have other plaques alongside them, or else they should move them to a place where they aren't staring.
Jude, I presume they're going to say, right, first of all, the hunger strikers. If you go to Dungiven, there's a hunger striker thing. The hunger strikers can be memorialized in other public spaces, but in a police station, it's basically those who died in service. So that I presume that's
they were in a police. They died in service to a police force that has been since demobbed, let's say, and replaced by the PSNI. Now, the idea of the PSNI was that it would be a neutral, commendable police service to the general public. But I see this notion of the RUC plaques as pulling them back to the old days. It's linking them very tightly with the RUC.
I take, Jude, my understanding is now I am open to only bits I've read are media reports, so I haven't seen the actual report itself. But my understanding is what Byrne is saying is where there's an operational police station, the plaques will stay as is. Where if there's going to be closing down, the plaques obviously will be taken down, but he says it will be handled sensitively. Now, as to the bigger issue, whether that's in what you're saying is, wait a minute, if that's going to be the case, it's a divided society. Why should the policeman? Why shouldn't there be? That's a far bigger issue. But let me tell you here now, Dr. Constant, and you know it as well, because you just after saying it yourself. If you think they're going to put up a plaque or a memorial in a police station to the hunger strikers or a public building of any kind in Northern Ireland in the next 20, 30 years, you are kidding.
Well, isn't that exactly an example then of hierarchy of victims?
Yeah. Jude, hold on. You sent me a thing about the Irish Times in recent days about, this whole thing about, there was a guy who said the IRA were only one part of the conflict. There was the RUC, there was British intelligence, British Army, loyalists, and of course, a combination of all three, thanks to collusion. So, there's a whole, we could down a rabbit hole there. There's so much there.
You see, Pat, it comes back, I think, maybe to something that you said once, that while it's perfectly respectable and acceptable for people to argue for the status quo, to argue for a change is seen as essentially a bad idea, destabilizing, stirring things up. Inherently wrong, simply wrong to do that.
You read the Irish Times any day, and it's just the one thing that the people in the Republic don't want, and a lot of people in the North don't want, is change. Let's keep the old status quo. 50 plus 1 is perfectly fine to maintain the union. 50 plus 1 for United Ireland is totally wrong. That's it in a nutshell.
That's it, exactly. I think you put it very well there. Frankly, I find it depressing. You're supposed to be trying to make the PSNI more successful as a police service. And I've always said they started off very well. And since then, there's been a serious dip. And it's reflected in the number of nationalist Republicans who are joining the PSNI. And the truth of the matter is there's pretty damn few. I'll but I bet of £100 that there's not a steady stream of young men or women coming from West Belfast or from the bog side to join the PSNI.
No, there isn't. No, definitely not. No.
Okay, let's leave it. It's a depressing story. And as you say, it comes out of knee-jerk reaction and a belief that certain victims are to be commemorated and other victims.
No, but Jude, it's even more. It's knee-jerk, but I also think it's contrived, because when you actually dig into it and dig down into it, it's, these were recommendations, proposals. They were never going implemented. They were only put out, but they're calling for a guy to resign on the basis of proposals come forward, which, you go, wait a minute, in other words, even the suggestion of a parity of esteem or equality is enough to get this sort of reaction.
Yeah, it's, you could get depressed by it, all right, but
okay, let's move on.
Let's move on. In the news, what was it, this morning or yesterday?
Yeah.
Pat Hume'S dead.
Yeah.
I must say, when I heard that, my wife told me that, my heart sank.
Yeah.
It just sank. I didn't. Well, I did. I knew her. My sister knew her, I think. My sister was at St. Mary's with her, and I think she may even have taught in the same school in the Waterside with her for a time. But I know when I was trying to get that book, Tales Out of School, which is interviews with people who left St. Columns in 1960, I got, through her good offices, I got John Hume and Martin McGuinness as joint guests of honor. And she was more than charming, more than polite, more than pleasant. And she herself came with John to the lounge. And she just was, besides being a very nice, good-looking woman, she was, I believe, a very good, not just good-looking, but an inherently good woman. She was also a huge support, as Hume himself recognized, huge support to John Hume. He wouldn't have been able to do what he did if he hadn't had her. Yeah,
sure. John said that basically he was a parcel, and Pat sent him where he had to go. She started running the office way back in the early 60s when the civil rights stuff, and she was there up until, I'd say, nearly 2000, 1998, probably the Good Friday agreements. I'd say maybe shortly after that she might have sort of pulled back a bit. But Jude, Pat was the public face, and she was a genuinely nice woman. Very, very kind, very compassionate, very strong as well. Now, I think John I don't think could have done half of what he done without that. John was missing half the time. He was in Europe, he was in America, and like Pat was the woman who was the rock at the home. She was the rock in the office. She was the public, as I said, she was the public face. Jude, one simple story that I had sort of defined Pat Hume for me. We were at a mayor's ball, as they call them, many years ago. And Pat Hume was there, and they were all maybe 12 these big round tables and so on. Anyway, this young waiter came over, and he was about to serve, and she called him by his first name. She says, "Oh, John, how you doing?" And she sat and talked to that waiter for about 10 minutes, in the front of everybody. And by the way, this doesn't, but that young fella, when he left, was glowing, like he was made to feel special. And she had that gift of making people feel, and other people know almost when they're getting the food, almost ignore the waiter. She went out of her way not only to talk to him, but called him by his first name and chatted to him for about 5 minutes, whatever it was. And Jude, I remember thinking to myself, that's class.
It's people like that make your faith in humanity surge and grow stronger, I think. I remember, this is a slightly parallel thing, but I think there's certainly there are parallels. When I was in Canada, there was a very well-known national Canadian author called W.O. Mitchell, Bill Mitchell. And he'd written this big book, and a lot of people knew him. But he came as a sort of a visiting writer. And I remember one of the talks he gave, and he talked about, what you need to do if you want to become a writer and so on. And one of the things he mentioned was, he said, and make sure you have a partner who will, a wife or a husband who will make it possible for you to write.
Yeah.
I thought that an awful lot of truth in that. It's certainly true in my case. Anyway, if you don't have that supporting presence in the background, as a writer, it's going to be very, very difficult for you, I think. Certainly if you're a family person. And I think with the same thing applied, and far more so, of course, to John Hume and Pat. Without Pat
Jude,
Hume,
when you think what they lived through, their home was attacked a couple of times. John, I remember telling me one time he was, I think, in the BBC in Belfast, and somebody says, "Mr. Hume, there's a taxi waiting for you outside." He says, "I didn't call it taxi." And when they checked it out, it wasn't a taxi at all. John could have been, they had a holiday home in Donegal. The cops had because they were all worried about guys coming over from the water side over the foil, and so on. They lived a very stressful life for many years. And then, of course, the famous thing about, the Dublin 4 attacks in the Sunday Independent during the whole talks with Gerry Adams. Like, Pat was the rock on which John's strength was founded. But they might have been famous and they might have done this and all that, but by God, the whole family paid a price for John's life.
Just to end it on our comments on that on a light note, Pat, I remember her being interviewed years ago, and the interviewer saying, what attracted you to John? I think she met him at a dance in the Borderland or somewhere, did she?
I'm not sure.
But anyway, wherever she met him, she was asked what attracted her about him, and she said, "Well, for a start, he was a good-looking guy."
He was actually.
Which I thought was a very, very genuine sort of answer. There was no rubbish.
Oh, I loved his personality and character.
And I knew
he was good looking and fancied him.
I've heard reports of him giving out chicken soup. It's just that disarming, charming, disarming. The two things really. God be good to her anyway. God be good to her. I'm sure he will be, because she certainly led a life of self-sacrifice, and she was never pushy, and she was always there. Anyway, as I say, God be good to her. Okay, final item, Pat. I know you've been worrying about the question of housing in the South and the way rents are rocketing and so on, but I want you to stop worrying now, because I watched last night prime time, and that all was explained by the housing minister. They're going to build, what is it? They're going to have €4 billion euros a year. They're going to build 300,000 homes by the end of this decade. And they're going to end homelessness. You will search in the year 2030 the length and breadth of the 26 counties, and you will not find a homeless person. Right?
Yeah. Jude,
hold on. It's Alexa. Alexa, stop.
Alexa, shut up.
That woman.
She's interfering in your life. She's more of a wife to you than mine. My
wife's bad enough without that. When you're young, you're told to hold your tongue. Hold your tongue.
Hold your tongue. But right, Jude, when you think of 300,000 houses between now and 2030, 4 billion a year. Apparently, they're 5 years. 4 billion has been ring fenced, so that's 20 billion guaranteed for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Now, and it's all very good, but here, Jude, I have a big issue with their definition of affordable housing. Somewhere in the region of 250,000.
That's right.
Now, Jude, I have a big question mark about that. Like, Jude, I'm just switching into a Northern Ireland term. The average earnings, I think, in Derry is somewhere as 23,000. That's the average earning. Now, Jude, where under God do you get the money to service a 250? Well, okay, it'd be euros, but still, 250 is probably 220 sterling. Right, Jude, that's a lot of money. And by the time these houses are probably built, they could be up to 300,000. So the definition of affordable, I would like some illumination on that. Secondly, Jude, the housing lists, I think if you added up all the housing lists, Dublin, Cork, Galway, even Letterkenny's got a massive housing list. People waiting for houses. Like, I would wonder, would 300,000 houses even look at it? That's the second thing. And the third thing, we have this last couple of years, and I'm sure you're aware of it, Dr. Collins, there are massive numbers of people. They're saying that we should have a 33rd county, and we should call it Poland. We have so many people, Polish people, staying or coming to live in the Republic of Ireland. Now, I think it was the last count. I'm making this up, but it could be something like 230,000 Poles. Yeah, I think I remember. So that's so there's all that, Jude. never mind then. Now, okay, I think it was you said some time back that the days of 8 and 10 Catholic children are gone. There's a drop off. But hey, Jude, it was confirmed there last week that for the first time since the famine, or was it pre-famine, we're now 5 million in the Republic. And if you add that, as it 1.6 million, well, you're probably 6.6 million on the whole of the island. But Jude, it's a growing population. So, by the way, you can't knock us. I think it's fair play to the government and Dara Bryan. Now, it took him a year to come up with the plan, but if it works, fantastic. But I listened to Owen O'Brien yesterday, and he's saying, look, this is more, it's a blueprint for more of the same. They talk a good game, but they haven't delivered. Now, this last, Jude, this is a final point. About 2 years ago, there was about 8 to 9,000 people on the streets throughout the island of Ireland. Jude, that was unbelievable. And there was all sorts of things about it. Now, that it's sort of gone off the boil. It's been a big issue. But Jude, if they can produce 300,000 homes by the end of this decade, it'll be a massive thing to achieve. And I'm not knocking it. I think if they do it, fair play to them.
Yeah, as you say, it certainly is a noble plan. Well, just a couple of points I would make, Pat. I watched that primetime thing last night on RTE about housing, and the housing minister came on and talked, and then immediately after, or maybe a bit later actually, Owen O'Brien came on and talked, and the interviewer made the point that they had asked the housing minister if he'd come on and debate with Owen O'Brien, so be there at the same time, and that he hadn't agreed to it, unfortunately. And O'Brien said the same thing. It is unfortunate that we couldn't have had a debate about this, which I thought was very wise of the housing minister, because O'Brien is walking around with an encyclopedia inside his head about housing, and he has written a book about it. And there isn't a
detail he doesn't know. Yeah, exactly. And like. That's one of the things that they, and Jude, it is factually correct. Some of the young Sinn Féin guys, like Pierce Doherty, was on one night with Michael Noonan, and Michael Noonan, despite having all the civil service, he says, "By the way, Minister, you're 2 billion out." And he says, "No, I'm not." He says, and he says, "Well, if you add that, and that, you're 2 billion." And during the middle of the program, he admit, "Yeah, you're right." Now, Jude, that's why so many young people are sort of going towards Sinn Féin. And I'm not here to bat for Sinn Féin. I'm just making the point that there are a lot of very bright young people now coming out, joining Sinn Féin, and I think the old guys and the old don't like it.
Well, let's come back to the housing thing. I would agree with what you're saying, indeed. But let's just stick with the housing thing. As I say, O'Brien was pretty impressive, and he was pretty critical also of this plan, insofar as he didn't believe it was going to happen. Are these 300,000 houses? I mean, the only way that people would be able to afford those would be if they were public, if they were what we used to call council houses.
Yeah.
And that they were built at cost or rented. So the rent was possible for people.
Yeah.
But I mean, there seems to be some vagueness as to whether how many of these will be of that type. There's another problem, of course, and that is Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, the people, the politicians, are mainly middle-class people.
Absolutely.
And I would venture a guess that the majority of their support comes from middle-class people. And I would say that the contractors who will come in to do this work of building the houses are very solidly middle-class. So I would have thought that, well, it might be on public, it might be a concern for everybody, especially those who are less well off. In practice, it'll be almost impossible for them to bite off their own nose to spite their face. They won't be able to do it, in all sorts of ways. There'll be pressures coming on them. One of the pressures will be, of course, NIMBY. Where are you going to build these houses? Are you going to build them near us? What are you doing that for? This is a nice town, and you're going to land us with a bunch of scruff? No way. So there'll be all sorts of upset about it. And that's even apart from the fact that this will have to match with the crisis of our time, which is the ecological system.
Yeah.
If you're going to build 300,000 houses on green land, you're going to be doing terrible bloody damage to the prospects of the environment. So all of that hasn't really been sorted out. I think it's smart of Fianna Fáil to try, and Fine Gael, I guess, to try to do something about housing, because housing, I think, is the exocet missile that is going to hold this government below waterline, and it's going to sink it. Now, it mightn't sink it until another 2 or 3 or 4 years, but it's going to sink it, except they build these houses. And I don't think they'll be able to do it because there's too many problems. Even the best will in the world, I think it'll be almost impossible on environmental grounds, on social pressure grounds, on lobbies by contractors, all sorts of stuff.
Jude, you started off saying about me and my things about rent, but Jude, that is factually correct now. It's $2,000 a month for a house in Dublin. And like, what sort of wages do you have to go? You go now, even parts of it, we'll say relatively rural parts, the average maybe 800 to 1,400. Jude, if you have to pay 1,400 a month for a house, say Sligo, just use Sligo, as you know, it's not a huge town. You know, right, 1,400, multiply that by 12, Jude, so what's that, about 15,000, 16,000, you know, just a year. So, and then you have to maybe raise a family, maybe need a car, feed them, clothe them, educate them. That's, you know, if you're on 45, 46,000 a year, which, by the way, Jude, is an average salary, in fact, quite a good one. You know, you need 2 people working. Like even my youngest son, like, Jude, they're paying an arm and a leg. They have 2 kids for a creche. Now, so the reality is, as I start off this, what's your definition of an affordable house?
Yeah, the only way I can see them making it work is to make sure that a lot of those houses are what we call council houses of good quality. I mean, there's a lot of terrific, I think, quality counts what I would still call council housing. I'm not sure what the term is today, about Belfast. I mean, it's been transformed.
Absolutely.
So if they were able to do that, then I think that would be I think a lot of people would commend them on that. I don't
Jude, if you drive into Derry from the Bridge End area, from where I live, on the left-hand side, there are what they call housing executive houses, and they are superb. The estate is superb. It's laid out brilliantly. There are lawns. The whole design of it is first class. You know, remember years ago they just used to throw up old houses and anything it'll do. Outside toilets and things that didn't work. Now they have even these what do you call them? Jude, the things for heating outside. No, I can't remember. No, like the thermal heating things on the roofs. Well, that sort of stuff.
Solar panels.
Solar panels. Thank you.
But could I correct you briefly? They didn't throw up those public houses, not public houses, executive houses. They didn't, certainly in the 70s, they didn't just throw them up. They designed them in a way that was suitable to the British Army.
Absolutely. Only one way in and only one way out.
Correct. That's correct. So I just thought I'd let that be included. But it is a mammoth task. But I mean, somebody's to blame for allowing things to get to this stage. You can only commend Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael for making an effort, and the Greens to make an effort to do something about it. They'll have to, if it's only to save their own skin. But it seems to be impossible. Very interesting question. I think what's going to happen is this. I think that either before the end of the term of government or at the end of the term, natural term of government of this government, this housing problem will still be a major issue. Sinn Féin got a lot of the votes they got last time out from people who were disgusted with the situation in terms of housing. It'll be even worse when it comes the next time. And Sinn Féin will get in. So here's the question. People will be looking very hard at Sinn Féin to see can they crack it. Now, we've agreed that Sinn Féin are able to point out correctly the difficulties, the impossibilities of certain aspects of this plan. But will Sinn Féin be able to crack it?
Jude, here's very simple. It's the same thing. The Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael track record in housing this last decade, and they've been in power between them this last decade, has been atrocious. If Sinn Féin gets in and they can't do anything, everybody's entitled to turn around and say, all you people can do is shout from the sidelines, you know, the hurler on the ditch, and they will deserve it. Now, the point is, the reason Sinn Féin get a bye ball from me and so many things, they haven't been in power in the Republic of Ireland.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. If they get into power in the Republic...
If they get into power, then the onus is on them to deliver.
Yeah, but you think they would be able to? whenever these other...
They talk a good game. And as you said, rightly said, Darragh O'Brien, the minister, wouldn't agree to discuss with Owen O'Brien live on the studio last night because on the basis, I'm presuming, and so do you, that he would eat him alive with detail and whatever. So what O'Brien wanted was a straight here, I'm selling this as our plan, and I'm not discussing it with them because he'll destroy me, and I presume that's why. But it's one thing talking a good game; it's actually another thing playing it.
And you think that applied to Sinn Féin as well?
I don't know, Jude. They have never been in power, and I have no, and I don't judge. Everybody's saying that comes out with this ridiculous one. The North is what is the? It's a combination. There's no. Everybody has to sort of compromise. So you can't say in Northern Ireland as well as that. There's it's controlled from Westminster.
Yeah, it's a different system.
I
actually think government. Yeah, I think that the Sinn Féin will have one major advantage when they tackle housing, as inevitably they will in government, and that is the fact that, as I've said, many of the voters and forces that are supporters of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael would tend to be middle class.
Yeah.
Most of the supporters and voters for Sinn Féin would tend to be, not exclusively by any means, would tend to be near to working class.
Absolutely.
So they'll be able to, give the resources to genuinely housing people who are finding life very difficult. And it might upset some people who are middle class, but they're more likely to be able to address the problem. They won't have.
That's why Sinn Féin are on the rise, Jude, because it's the people who have been left behind, people who are going to face water charges, people and couldn't afford them, people who are finding it difficult to get their kids to school, can't afford it, people who are getting poor wages, and we're being left behind generally in society. That's the demographic that is now going towards Sinn Féin, and one of the big reasons, and it's simple, the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are going and housing is they know that, and to use your term, this is the big bullet item that they have to address.
Yeah. Well, it's a very interesting one, and certainly Fianna Fáil realise, well, they'd be slow learners if they hadn't, that housing is the issue. It really is. I mean, just think about it, Pat. During the lockdown, it was made bearable by the fact that people like you and me, we've got homes, we've got books in, and we've got TVs, and we weren't worrying about would we be able to pay the rent. And we weren't worrying about would we find ourselves homeless because we didn't pay the rent. So we value. A lot of people have learned to value their houses and where they live to a greater extent. What in the name of God must it be like for people who aren't able to get a house, or people who find that they have a house but now they can't pay the mortgage anymore?
Exactly. To stress that, it must be unbelievable. I remember when we started out and I was on a quote unquote big job at the time. I remember the interest rate was about 13%. Of my monthly wage, the first 2 weeks' wages went to pay the mortgage. And the other 2 weeks fed us food, petrol in the car, probably paid the what he called on the car as well. That was tough going, very, very tough going.
Yeah, you were from a relatively comfortable position. The same as apply to myself. Anyway, let's wish Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael a fair wind for their. I genuinely hope that they succeed. If they build 300 houses and it solves the problem, I will be voting Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael if they do. I'm voting for whoever delivers. Yeah. Okay. All
the best, Jude.
No jokes. No jokes.
No.
No jokes. Oh, for God's sake.
The ones
I bring a joke with you.
The ones. No, hold on. The ones I hear you can't repeat on air.
Well, I had a joke about a convent, but I don't think I'll tell it after all. Okay.
Bye, Jude. Good luck.